Hi, Hugo. Sorry
Hey,
about that. I was trying to find a joining link, but it seems the settings doesn't provide any join links.
yeah, yeah, I had to find a different laptop for which I can use the Zoom app.
Okay,
But just
okay.
so you know, like
Sorry about that.
for someone to join Zoom meetings through this, they need the Zoom app. They need to be able to install it, and in my case, I can't. So,
Okay,
but
okay.
I can't on my work laptop, but I could on my normal laptop.
Um, okay. So we are live on YouTube also, and so I see that we also have Joelle, so we can start.
Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm really glad we could get together. I welcome to everyone who is joining us via the live streaming. I believe we have a number of people who joined us on Zoom also. Welcome. The goal of the event today is actually to really give us an opportunity as a community of people committed to reproducibility to come together. So we'll spend maybe 20 or 30 minutes early on to share with you the thoughts from the organizing committees, from some of the sponsors of the reproducibility program, as well as previous participants to the challenge, to just sort of share our thoughts on this. And then we're going to open it up to the community to ask their questions. With the invites, you should have gotten a link to a Slack channel where you can post your questions. And we're going to be monitoring that and bringing some of these questions here to the discussion. Today we'll be together for about an hour, but the goal is really to build up the community so that, you know, even though you may be in your own corner of the world, in your own house, maybe some of you have access to a lab, though I'm guessing most of you are working from home today, that you do realize that there's a community of researchers and practitioners who are really deeply committed to reinforcement, to reproducibility, and to doing strong research and having strong experimental methodology. So that's our goal for today. We may have some follow-up events or ability for the community to communicate, which we'll talk about over time, but that's the starting point for today. Before going any further, I'll just do a quick round of introduction, maybe just introduce who you are, where you're from, your affiliation, and what is your role in the meeting today. And after that, we'll go back to each of you to give you a little bit more time to talk about your point of view. But let's start with a quick round of intro so everyone knows who's on screen today. I'll get us started, since I think we have a few more people who've joined by now. We're at 5 after official launch time for a meeting. I'm Joelle Pineau. I'm a faculty member at McGill University. I'm also managing director of Facebook AI Research Lab. I'm based in Montreal, and I'm the co-chair for the reproducibility program at NeurIPS this year. Hugo?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Hugo Larochelle. I lead the brain team in Montreal. I'm also a member of Mila here as well. And I guess I was senior program chair for NeurIPS last year, where we kind of kicked off our relationship with Joelle and Koustuv and the agenda of trying to encourage reproducibility, where, for instance, we kicked off the notion of and a particular specific policy and guidance for how to share code, and our expectation that people should do so to the extent that they can. And the other thing, I guess this year I'm general chair. I was less involved in the reproducibility program, but I'm happy to share sort of my perspective on its importance this year as well, and I think in the future.
Thank you. Koustuv?
Hi, I'm Koustuv. I'm a PhD student at McGill University and Mila, and I'm also co-running this challenge, and I'm also a co-reproducibility chair in NeurIPS. And yeah, so really glad to meet you all, and glad to build this community. so that we can push for more reproducibility across a lot of conferences. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me pass it over to Jessica.
Thanks, Joelle. Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm a PhD student at Brown, and I'm also organizing this challenge this year.
Thank you. Jesse?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jesse. I just recently started as a postdoc at the Allen Institute for AI. My part of this challenge is that I started working on reproducibility specifically for EMNLP, which is an NLP conference, incorporating the reproducibility checklist, and also participating in the challenge, and then have joined forces with the rest of this crew to make this the best it can be. Yeah.
Thank you. We were supposed to have Robert Stojnic with us today. Robert's a co-founder of Papers with Code, which is a great partner in this reproducibility challenge, enabling the hosting of code and benchmarks. Unfortunately, Robert is sick today, so won't be able to join us. But if you do have questions, we'll try to find a way to send them his way and get back to you over time. We have 3 more people I'll introduce. Guillaume.
Hi, my name is Guillaume Lam.
Your sound is cutting off, Guillaume. I don't know if you want to, we got the beginning. Maybe you want to just go closer to your mic. Now you're on mute.
Now it should be good.
Much better.
Perfect. So I don't know how much you got, but basically my name is Guillaume Lam, master student at UDM, and I'm one of the past participants from the Reproducibility Challenge.
Welcome. Cal?
Yes, hello everyone. So my name is Carl. I'm also a first-year master student at the University of Montreal, and yeah, my teammates and I participated in the last year challenge. Pro challenge.
Thank you. And Gabrielle?
Hi, my name is Gabriel. I'm the only one of the 3 that isn't doing my master's. I'm wrapping up my bachelor's right now in software engineering at McGill, and then I'll be working full-time at Microsoft. So hopefully what I could do today is provide a perspective from someone who didn't have plans to become an ML researcher. I know my 2 colleagues did, so I'll be happy to share my experience with you today.
Thank you very much. I will get us started a bit on the historical perspective for this challenge. This year, the challenge is actually part of the reproducibility program at NeurIPS, but the idea of this challenge started about 3 years ago. A few of the major international conferences had reproducibility workshops where researchers came together for a day with some talks on how we might encourage people to spend more time reproducing the work of other researchers, really from the point of view that if work is reproducible, it really gives us higher confidence in the scientific value of the results. And so that's really the motivation for this movement of reproducibility, of increasing the confidence we have in our knowledge. And it's important as a field to have, knowledge that we can really build on with high confidence. And so some of that was discussed in this workshop, and people would bring in different points of views on work that was or wasn't reproducible, what it meant. And part of that was really a discussion of how to set the conditions such that more people would embrace participation in reproducibility work, that it would be rewarding and rewarded to engage in that type of work. And so I know Hugo and I were at a particular workshop at ICML about 3 years ago on this topic, and a lot of brainstorming coming up of different ideas. I had this idea, maybe a few of us together, I forget now, had this idea of really trying to lean on the community at large to participate in reproducibility. Whereas typically in a conference, you submit a paper and there's kind of a pool of reviewers who vet the scientific quality of the paper. But as the community has grown, it's hard to ask these reviewers to take on more and more responsibility. So if you ask each reviewer to not just read the paper, but also re-implement the code and rerun all the experiments, it becomes really unbearable in terms of load. So the idea is, who else in the community can we invite in to participate and contribute to this process? There was a lot of back and forth of, whether we could put the invitation at large, you might get just anyone trying to reproduce work. Maybe they would be successful, but maybe they wouldn't be. And would it be the fault of the authors and so on? So a lot of back and forth and pros and cons trying to do that. And we decided to just run that as an experiment, to make the jump, run the reproducibility challenge. The first one was run in parallel with iClear about 2 years ago, iClear 2018, if I remember correctly. And invite the community specifically for the iClear papers. And our thinking has evolved a bit over the years. That very first iteration, we ran the challenge during the review period, thinking that people who did the reproducibility study could contribute it and it could be taken into account in the decision of the paper. That proved to be hard to stick to that very tight schedule that is imposed by conference reviewing. It also turned out that it might have created some slightly adversarial conditions between people doing the reproducibility and the authors who are trying to make the work only look in their best, shiniest light. And so we took a step back, made some modifications, and since then we've run the reproducibility challenge on accepted papers. The other reason being that if you run it on all the papers, some of these papers are actually not very good. They're going to be rejected on the basis of the written words, and we don't want to invest our time in terms of implementation and experimentation on those lower quality papers. So last year we ran it on the accepted NeurIPS papers, and this year, at popular demand to expand this to papers from other conferences, we actually have 7 different conferences we're partnering with, and we're offering the possibility to reproduce papers from all of these. I think they're really the top conferences in AI, including, of course, NeurIPS, who's been our primary sponsor and home for this program, but NeurIPS, ICML, iClear, also bringing in EMNLP, and ACL on the language side, and bringing in CVPR and ECCV on the computer vision side. So it gives us much broader access to different papers, to different communities, different participants. And I'm really excited to see this year's edition for that reason. With that long historical introduction, I'm going to pass it on to Hugo and get the point of view. And Hugo has been really one of the champions and major senior sponsors of this effort. In many ways, we wouldn't be here without his advocacy with the NeurIPS board and some of the senior organizers in the community. And so I'd love to hear from him why he thinks this is important to the community at large.
Thanks, Joelle. That's giving you more credit than I deserve, I feel, but I appreciate it. So I guess when I got most involved in the challenge was last year when I was senior program chair. And I guess this question of ability to reproduce work was something that Joelle actually had started talking about quite a bit. And the year before that, 2018, I think is the year that you gave your keynote at NeurIPS and talked specifically about that, introducing this notion of checklists as a soft way of encouraging better practices. And so that kind of felt like the natural next step for us, which was to just continue in that march. And I was already quite motivated by the idea of try to, again, similarly sort of softly encourage people to make code available. And that's where the idea of the code submission policy, which was still used for 2020, was put in place. And that brought us, from, I forget what the percentage of papers at code at ICML the year before, maybe it was 50% or something like 60, 50. And then it brought us to 75% that year. I actually checked before this meeting just to see whether I had numbers. And they're still at 76% of papers in their camera ready provided some links to some code, which in a sense it's good. We're not it wasn't like fashionable and then people stopped doing it. It seems like the same set of people anyways are maintaining that practice. But we're almost certainly not really done, I guess. We wrote or mostly Joelle and her various partners who analyzed some of the results from what people were responding relative to authors, for instance, and also reviewers, how they were using the checklist and things like that have been part of a study that we put on arXiv, trying to see how these various factors had an influence. I think just in general, more systematically thinking about how do we organize the field, how do we introduce perhaps soft incentives for doing the right thing or encouraging good behaviors, I think is something that was quite compelling to me. And I kind of find it, I don't think it's going to go away, or at least our interest in that, partly because even now, just from the types of problems that people in machine learning are looking at, there is a lot of interest in making sure that if you look at all the transfer learning research, or just generally speaking, out of domain generalization, I think in a way, reproducibility and or replicability is sort of getting at the similar problem, which is that whatever we create in terms of technology, whether it's code or an idea, we want it to work outside of the domain that you actually evaluated it for. And for that reason, I think that it's going to be more and more part of sort of our scientific consciousness of where we should be putting effort. So for all these reasons, I was quite glad to contribute.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us today. I will invite Jesse next into the conversation. Jesse's been really a champion of reproducibility, specifically within the NLP community, and really supporting that conference through usage of their own checklist. And so be happy to hear from your point of view what's going on in the EMNLP as one of our partner organizations.
Yeah, so as Joelle said, at EMNLP this year, we introduced the first NLP reproducibility checklist, which is built on and highly related to the ML reproducibility checklist that's been used previously. And really, the key argument for me here, the real motivation, is that as a collection of individuals, community really is a bunch of solo actors, and there's not some overarching organization which tells people to write reproducible papers and to provide their code until we have something like this kind of soft reproducibility checklist, which suggests, it just reminds authors of what they should be doing. And in my eyes, that plus something like the reproducibility challenge, one way that I'm excited about what's going on this year is tying those two things together. So here at EMNLP, we had the reproducibility checklist. We also now for the reproducibility challenge have a template that we've introduced, which is designed to help structure the reproducibility challenge submissions. And it also ties in, it has a place for all of the items in the checklist, really tying those two pieces together. Authors of the original papers include the checklist items, but also those that are writing these reproductions to make sure that they also, if they're missed in the original paper, include, again, those items that are necessary for reproduction. I think at a high level, another motivational piece for me is that this is really a discussion about how we compare between different approaches. So going forward, I'm also really excited about incorporating some of this information to papers with code and to the leaderboards that are presented on papers with code, because leaderboards just comparing, one number against another single number, that's not so useful to somebody that's really interested in building on some of that work or just understanding the state of the art on some topic. So from my perspective, the most exciting thing about the 2020 challenge is the way that it connects together. At EMNLP in particular, I'm very happy that the program co-chairs were excited about and really enthusiastic about the reproducibility checklist. So the conference is actually happening right now. This is the third day of the conference. So in the intro, the reproducibility checklist was, described in a little bit of detail in the welcome remarks, and I'm excited now to have the results so we can compare the checklist responses, both against the other conferences we've seen and going forward against conferences in the future. Yeah, and then I was looking at the responses a little bit before this meeting as well, and I found that at EMNLP this year, we had just under 50% submissions submit code. So it was like the high 40s, which I think is interesting. That's where the machine learning conferences started when they first introduced these checklists. So I would love to see broader adoption of these ideas going forward. And now we're measuring it, so we can.
That's great. Thank you, Jesse. And it's great to get sort of the updates live as the conference is happening. I will pass it over to Koustuv to give us some updates. I know Koustuv has been working closely with Robert in terms of setting up some platform tooling and so on to support all of this work and make it a little bit easier for everyone.
Hi, thanks, Joelle. So yes, for the challenge, we have been like explicitly using OpenReview as our central platform. And OpenReview has been like really helpful for us to like set up the entire portal. So now you can go into OpenReview and like search for papers from 7 conferences. Like as of today, we have all the papers until EMNLP. So the EMNLP papers are still not added because we are like scraping it right now. But otherwise, still like NeurIPS, you will find like all papers, and the EMNLP papers should be like live by this week. And in the OpenReview portal, you can also like comment on the individual papers so that you can gain attraction from the original authors. So basically, you can talk to the original authors using the portal. And you can also subscribe to any of these papers. So whenever you subscribe, like you can get any notification. And these notifications can include like if other teams are claiming on that particular paper, or if the author has replied to you. So even if, let's say, if you are a NeurIPS author, it's or any conference author within like 2020, the conferences that we cover, it's imperative that you also go to your forum and subscribe such that you know that which teams are participating, such that you can help them out. And that is like from platform perspective, like we are very grateful to OpenReview for supporting us in this way. And right now the challenge is ongoing. We are getting like more and more claims, and hopefully we will get like a lot of reports by the end of the deadline. So essentially deadline wise, there has been like some confusion. So we essentially have like 2 deadlines. First is the soft deadline, that is before NeurIPS. And this deadline is not meant for reviewing. This deadline is just meant for you to like showcase your work to the NeurIPS attendees. And then we have a final deadline that is on the end of January, where you can like submit your final report. And we made it towards like end of January to accommodate a lot of fall courses as well as courses which end in January. So yeah, so that is like from the tooling and the platform perspective. And yeah, over to you, Joelle.
Thank you very much, Koustuv. Great to hear these updates. Jessica, do you have some points to share? I know you've been deeply involved also in terms of developing best practices for reproducibility.
So one of the things I think that I like to emphasize about this challenge is that I think it's a very useful way for the community to consider how do we improve as a community. And I think one of the things I particularly love about this challenge is that this allows us to be very innovative and really push the field to improve ourselves. I think that when it, as Joelle had mentioned earlier, one of the challenges with bringing best practices in reproducibility to major conferences is that these conferences are so enormous, right? And now we're dealing with 7 of them. And so any individual change is magnified tremendously because of the scale at which these changes occur. And so I think one of the exciting things, and Koustuv has highlighted this, Hugo and Jesse have also highlighted this, is that this is really an opportunity for us to really take risks with improving best practices in the field. And so I think one of the things that I would like to encourage all of you and encourage, I guess myself as well and my co-organizers is to be willing to, try new things and to really take a attitude of curiosity towards our part in this challenge, because really this is how these things happen. I mean, one of the things that Hugo was talking about was about code submission, and one of the parts of reproducibility I've studied is even just submission of code. And if we look back to several years ago, prior to the strong recommendations that Joelle has suggested and the creation of this reproducibility chair role, code publication was much rarer, right? We were getting into numbers of about a third, and now we have really doubled that number. And so I really think that, you know, this is really a community-wide effort, but also a community-wide effort, not only in reproducibility, but in improving scientific practice in the field. And so we really are looking to you to help us inform how we can do better research in the future. And this is why it's so important that we get your active feedback during this process, because the things that you learn about and discover will really inform how we do research in the future with regards to the conferences happening in the years to come. So I think it's particularly exciting, and you know, again, thank you all for participating.
Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. And I think this this cued me to emphasize one of the changes we've seen over the last few months that is quite exciting in terms of this effort is the partnership between Papers with Code and Archive. For those of you who are not aware, Archive has been for many years the leading host and repository for scientific work, published and unpublished. And very recently, they integrated a tab where authors who submit their papers can also actually submit a link to code that then links them to Paper with Code. So in many cases, you know, you may have ability to access prior code for the papers you're trying to reproduce through that new functionality, which is really quite exciting. Enough from the organizing side. Let's hear from the side of the participants. And I'm really happy that we have 3 of them join us today to talk a little bit about their experience. I think they chose to answer the call for citizen science, and we're really happy that they're here to tell us about it today. Maybe I'll go in reverse order for this and ask Gabrielle first to tell us a bit, maybe what was your motivation for doing this, what you learned through it, and if you have any tips for this year's participants.
Sure. So actually, I mentioned before that I'm coming from a background, more of a software engineer mindset. You know, I'm going to work as a full-time engineer at Microsoft. I'm going to work in AI platforms, so there is some crossover, but I never saw myself as a researcher. But I've always been someone who doesn't want to shy away from a challenge, especially with regards to tech. I want to learn new things, and you know, I was always interested in ML, so I went through the challenge, and it was quite an amazing experience, I will say, because you get a taste of what it's like to be a researcher. It's kind of like a good springboard for people who are interested and want to, you know, go do a master's or PhD in ML. And there's certainly much to learn about the, you know, paper review process, you know, understanding the theory and all that. So I would say the main thing I would advise is like, just take that time to understand the theory before you decide what you want to do with the paper. And, you know, be prepared, and then feel free to reach out to the authors and ask them questions, you know, clarify things. And as far as code goes, since that's more my domain, definitely we sort of lucked out in our process, and we had a very well-written code base that was extendable. It was sort of designed to be a library that you can use in other apps. So it was quite amazing and easy to work with. And so we were able to sort of, and it is also open source, and being that I'm an engineer, I'm an open source proponent. And so I was actually at one point able to make a pull request on their GitHub to add some code that I needed and that our team needed in order to customize to do what we wanted to do with our study. And so that was fantastic. And another thing I would highly suggest, and I know that people have asked about tools, you know, related to, you know, collaboration. I cannot stress this enough. We were pretty much saved by Weights and Biases. It's a service that basically does logging and instrumentation for ML models. And so this gave us observability into our results. We were able to collaborate because, you know, I was running results on my machine, you know, we all had our own DMs on the cloud that we were using. And so we were able to, you know, see each other's runs in real time. You know, we know what our teammate is doing. And with that, we were able to sort of organize ourselves. We knew how long the runs would take. We were able to budget our compute time effectively. So we knew, hey, you know, it takes 12 hours to do this. So make sure that you started at like 8 a.m. and then before going to bed, you start the next one. And, you know, you get that kind of observability, which is great. And it also saved us, you know, we were able to see that, hey, the first 20 runs we did, we made a mistake. We configured it wrong. We got the wrong results. They make no sense. We were able to go back and reproduce that because you can see the parameters we use and everything. So I'll share a link to our page for our project. You can see that we have 130 runs. It's public. So you can see all our graphs and all our stuff. And hopefully that gives you a taste if you're, you know, interested, if you're working on the reproducibility challenge. I encourage you to use a tool like this. I'm sure there are other ones that exist, but this is the one we stumbled upon. And I think I'll pass it back to my teammates then.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. That's great. I think weights and biases is the tool you recommended, and you said you would share the link to the project page. I think we can share that maybe on the Zoom chat, and we'll also make sure we put it in the comments to YouTube so that people who are listening in to the streaming version can look that up. Carl, I'll invite you to say a few words next. Would love to hear what was the paper about. I don't know if you remember the title, but what did you try to reproduce? What was the topic of the work?
Yeah, so the article we chose was about introducing a new unsupervised learning in the Atari games. The title is related to that. I don't know if it's the exact title, but something like that. And it came, as Gabriel said, with code from the others. What we found nice is that last year, I don't know if it's the same thing this year, but in the challenge, we had the choice of 3 tracks. So one was ablation, one was reproduction, and the other one was like full reproduction without code. And what we chose was the ablation track because for 2 main reasons. First, it includes a reproduction of results part, which we found was useful to understand the article first about the theory, and second, the code to understand better what to do with the code. And the second part was that it was not limited to reproduction. So we still had the freedom to do some experimentations on our own. And we felt that that was quite interesting. And yeah, so after, maybe I can talk about what personally I learned from this project. So in the article, there was many decisions that were taken without, I would say, full explanation. And I can give an example. So for example, there was a loss function, which was a weighted average of 2 loss, A and B, let's say, and the weights were given as 1/2. So we read that and we were a bit skeptical. Why 1/2 and 1/2? Did it try something else? So one of the experimentation we did was plug in P and 1 minus P and tune in this. And we found that indeed 1/2 was the best choice. So so I would say that as a conclusion, we can say that sometimes the other don't explain fully their choices, but doesn't mean they didn't check for it. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's it. And maybe Guillaume wants.
That's a really important point. The amount of information that is revealed and what is not revealed can vary tremendously, and doing reproducibility studies sometimes helps us shed light on all of this. Thank you. I'll send it over to Guillaume for his perspective on it. And I will maybe ask you also to comment on one thing that has come up in some of the questions already, which is, you know, if you can talk a little bit about what was your interaction with some of the authors. I think you mentioned you were able to make a pull request. I would love to hear, how did you take that on? How did you communicate with them? If you have some tips on best practices there also.
Yeah, of course. I mean, honestly, this is perfect because this is what I was planning on talking about. So as Koustuv was saying, the new feature of being able to talk to authors is really useful. And we would have loved to have that feature when we were doing it. But what we did initially was, go through the paper. We tried to understand the best we could. But then we also contacted the author because, we were under the impression that they might have some intuition or, they spend more time on it. So they probably have a better idea of where, to go looking, where to do ablations. And for us as well, I think, what I personally learned is that not all ablations are equivalent, So you can maybe tune, may change with some hyperparameter, maybe it'll give, a couple fluctuations. But I think it's more important to do ablations where we're not sure entirely of what the result will be and how important it is, to the overall model, rather than, some very specific thing. So yeah. So then in the beginning, we exchanged emails with the author. We asked them, we expressed our interest and showed, we want to work on this. And then by, answering back, and because we kind of knew what the paper was about, he's able to give us, certain tracks of where he thinks we should go looking. And also, tracks where he didn't have time to work on, but he's saying, maybe you guys should go investigate that, and that could be interesting. So yeah.
Thank you. That's really useful tips. I think that this, one of the reasons we moved to doing it on accepted papers is to make it much more collaborative. Usually authors are pretty happy when their paper is accepted. And so they're going to be less guarded about what information they revealed. Whereas in the review process, they may be a little bit more guarded and concerned about what information they shared, whether they're going to be scooped if their paper doesn't get in, whether their work is going to be mischaracterized and so on. And so hopefully we can all benefit from that. I want to open it up, and I'm going to draw from some of the questions that we've been receiving. One of the questions is, do you have any recommendations in terms of resources, platforms, tools? We heard one already in terms of weights and biases. Is there anything else that you feel that you have seen used that you can recommend from the community or that you have used personally? Feel free to just kind of wave with your hand and I will direct traffic. Anyone has some? Koustuv, take it away. Get us started.
Yeah, so thanks for the great question. So actually, me and Jessica, we wrote a document a couple of months back detailing what are the different tools and best practices that you can use. So it's available in my blog. I can also share a link here in Zoom as well as I will share in the YouTube channels. So essentially, what we try to do is we list a lot of different tools that you can use. In my personal experience, since I work with PyTorch, so I will be kind of biased to that. But if you work with TensorFlow, you can also find equally good tools out there. For me personally, PyTorch Lightning has been really helpful because it's a all-in-one framework that helps in perfect reproducibility. It maintains model checkpoints and different model states, and it helps evaluation really well. But aside from that, there's a lot of different tools you should use for best practices. You can check out the best practices in my blog. For logging, TensorBoard has been really great. You can also use weights and biases, Comet ML. There's various different services that you can use these days. But there's another aspect which do not gets talked about a lot is about software deprecation. So that is where Jessica will be able to tell you a bit about. So Jessica.
Yeah. So one of the things that is a challenge that has been explored in reproducibility, and there's a really interesting 10-year reproducibility challenge that the journal ReScience just recently completed, is the role of software and software deprecation in results. And so one of the things that I would generally advise everyone to be particularly aware of when looking at other people's code is looking at what dependencies are being used. Luckily, many of us are looking at papers that are from this year. So the versions of software are probably very recent. But if you're interested in a paper that is from, even maybe 3 or 4 years ago, being able to replicate their software environment in order to run this experiment is going to be a particular challenge. And so hopefully you will have researchers who have very carefully documented the dependencies, hopefully in a very software readable format such that they can do that. And so that's something that is particularly important to consider. And I believe we also include resources for environment creation
we do.
and replication in our document.
Yep, you can find all of these different tools in our document, especially for software deprecation. Like a lot of people use Docker or like virtual machine instances. And there has been like a lot of different services coming up, like CodeOcean is for example, like we partnered with them last time, and they also like give you GPU enabled Jupyter Hub instances to work with. So these are like a lot of tools are available, but it's like you have to like make use of those tools. And when you are releasing code, you should really look into the ML code, ML code completeness checklist. So that is a checklist that is published by Robert Stojnic from Papers with Code. And it's very important to like shape your README in that format, such that it's very easy for someone to like pick up what are the salient parts of your code, how to run training, how to run evaluation, and so on. So as a community, we are like moving more and more towards reproducibility by enabling these kinds of methods. And hopefully you gain some insight while working on the challenge.
Thank you. Jesse, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would. So I think another component of this, which is increasingly important as time goes on, is availability of access to compute for those students or other participants that are trying to reproduce some potentially GPU-heavy experiments in the original papers. On the Reproducibility Challenge website, we do list, I think there's a few different sources for either really inexpensive GPUs, or a lot of places like CodeOcean gives some allotment of free GPUs per month based on the hour, so that people can run their experiments and keep those costs low. So I know, I ran a mini challenge for a class that I was teaching in winter of last year. And one major component, a piece of advice we gave to every student was, be careful you choose a paper to reproduce that you actually have the resources to do that. So this is one way that the community has supported reproducibility in general, and we can definitely take advantage of that going forward. And that list is on, like I said, it's on the Reproducibility Challenge 2020 website under resources.
Yes, thank you. That's a really good point to plan when you start your work, what will be probably your necessary compute budget, and make sure it's feasible. We do try to make some resources available, and probably going towards next year's, we're going to start having more organization around the sponsorship aspect of this challenge, and making sure we can get a more extensive sponsorship support for this kind of work. Digging into the questions I'm picking here and there, a really pragmatic question for our three past participants. How did you pick the order of authors on your report pragmatically? How do you do it?
So we kept it very simple. We went alphabetical. And that's actually a question I wanted to throw back, because I'm not really in a research community. Like, is there a preconceived notion that the first name on a report is like the lead author? Because in our case, we're all co-authors. We're doing the same, we all have the same level of accountability, but maybe in other environments, that's not the case. So
yeah. One thing I love about this challenge is that it kind of, for newer people who are newer to the research community, it kind of gives you a window into all the different aspects of the culture that comes along with research. So, with junior graduate students, that's always a question, like, how do we decide whether the best practices? How do people think about this? I will say alphabetical is traditional in some cultures. So if you go in computer science theory, they always do it alphabetically. And so you have some advantage if you have a last name starting with A, and if you're a Zhang, then you're unfortunately not often first author, but it's well known in the community. Maybe I'll send this question to Hugo, since as program chair of NeurIPS, you've seen a lot of papers come across your desk, and you've also been publishing yourself for many years. What are the best practices you've seen around this, specifically for machine learning papers?
So definitely for machine learning contributions, the rough guidance would be that the first author was kind of leading the paper. Definitely most involved in like the experiments. quite likely the writing and so on. And then the last position might be someone more senior who perhaps mentored the first author, was at the origin of the project or the idea. This is often the PhD advisor, for instance, of the first author. And that is probably the biggest, the most common approach. And now you start having these things like co-first authors where people put asterisks to try to sort of emphasize that it was really hard to pick a single first author, which has some valuable, it gets ridiculous for the last two positions, which starts being slicing a bit thin. I think a practice we don't see enough would be, and I think the reproducibility challenge reports might be a good one, is to just list what everyone has done at the end of the paper. I think we've done that once for one of my papers as well. Just say who did what, because that's useful for scientific contributions for sure, because then you know who to reach out to if you have questions about a specific experiment, who has done those experiments, so you can reach out to them. So I think that's something we don't do enough that we probably should do more. Not a super big fan of alphabetical, largely because the reality is that the convention is first author is probably the right contact person. That's another role that often the first author would play. And it is, it's a convention, it's somewhat arbitrary, but it's quite useful. It's a very sort of shortcut that's quite useful. And then I've definitely seen some papers where I thought the first author was probably the right person, and one of them was Ben Recht, I think, for one paper. And I was sort of surprised because he's a professor. I thought, I sort of doubt he's done all the experiments, but maybe he does because he's a pretty talented person. So who knows, maybe that's possible. But then if you look up the paper, he actually, to his credit, put it explicitly in asterisk. And I think as sort of a joke, wrote that he actually had done none of the work or did absolutely nothing. Or it was something like that, which I think is tongue-in-cheek kind of very Ben Recht way of saying that he is not the most important author on this paper. But you can see that can lead to some confusion, at least for the machine learning community. So generally speaking, I think for reproducibility reports, it would make alphabetical might make sense, but definitely making sure that having a listed contribution of what everyone has done is a good practice that probably in the community we should have just generally sort of adopt more broadly.
Thank you. I love that suggestion. It's one that I've often done when I do team projects in my own graduate level courses, asking all the team members to have a statement of who did what, and it sometimes prevents confusion. I will say in my experience as a researcher, it's rarely worth having a real conflict about authorship orders. Because the quality of the collaboration depends on so much more, and that's why I also love this idea of explicitly stating who's done what, because that's kind of a common understanding for the field. And so maybe this is something we should think of adopting for this challenge, and in particular maybe for the papers who we select for the ReScience special issue, leaving it out there as a thought. That brings me to the next question I'll pick out of the lot. We do have the plan to take a small set of curated reports, reproducibility reports, and publish them as a special issue in the journal ReScience. We've done that for the last 2 years. In the first year, we have a small set of papers, maybe 4 of them. Last year, I think we had about 10 papers that we thought were really above the bar. The reason we do it is both because we want to amplify really strong reproducibility work to make sure that it gets an audience and make sure that people who are doing this great work get some recognition for it. The other reason we do it is so that as a community, we develop a practice of making good reproducibility reports, and we have a sense of what are good ones. So if we just look at open review and you've got 100 reports, it's really hard to know what's a good report versus a less good one. And so for those of you who have some questions about how to structure your report, how to put it in, I encourage you to look at the last 2 issues we've edited with ReScience, so you'll get a sense of what are some of the better reports that we have seen. All of them have been peer-reviewed and edited. That being said, the specific question that came out in the thread is, do you have any suggestions for better report submissions to be accepted into ReScience? And so I'm curious to know here if anyone was a reviewer for some of these ReScience papers or an editor for them and wants to share what they saw as features of really good reproducibility reports. Jessica, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, as a reviewer, I think that, so I will say as a researcher, we are often very heavily focused on technical aspects of the problem. But then when it comes to review time, we are often instead evaluated on how we present the story of the problem. And I think as a research community, we don't necessarily always emphasize the communication aspect of our work. But it's actually really interesting because a recent NeurIPS paper on reproducibility highlighted the importance of communication as a means of ensuring reproducibility itself, right? They note that one of the main causes of an inability to reproduce a paper is simply just miscommunication, right? So if you're not explicitly clear, sometimes you don't necessarily get the result you would hope for. So I would say, if you're affiliated with a class, definitely get a lot of feedback, collect feedback early, come up with a draft, don't necessarily, if you want to get published, it's useful for reviewers to provide you with feedback, but, since this is a once over, I would definitely collect as much feedback as possible so that you can feel confident that you're able to communicate the whole story to a new reviewer. Because as a reviewer, I find that this reviewing challenge is a unique challenge in that you have to be really familiar with the paper and you have to be very familiar with the paper that you're reviewing. So it's an additional level of work. And so if you can make the job of the reviewer easier by really telling a very clear story of what you did and what was the result of your work, I would say that probably puts you in a better situation than even saying, oh, well, we were able to perfectly reproduce this work. I think oftentimes just the thoroughness of the method and the thoroughness of the communication is really key to doing a very good job.
Thank you. Yeah, I think these are great tips. Koustuv, do you have some other tips to add?
Yeah, so adding to Jessica's points, so essentially when if you want your reproducibility report to stand out, essentially you have to narrow your scope of reproducibility to one specific point of the paper. So that point, a paper these days are really loaded, they have a lot of experiments, they have a lot of ablations. But if you can find out, okay, this is one salient point that I want to investigate. So rather than basically just rerunning the entire code base of the paper, if you essentially narrow down to this particular point, that could be the baseline of the paper, that could be a central claim of the paper. It's even better if it's a central claim. So then you can essentially try to replicate that, or if you can try to rewrite code from scratch about that. And then when you dig deeply into that central question, that reproducibility report becomes more and more useful for a lot of readers. And that's how we get better reviewer scores. And that's how you get your publication in ReScience. Yeah.
Solid tips from one of the co-editors from the last edition. Did someone else want to jump in on this question? Jesse,
I would just like to add that this is a very nice way of also constraining the computational demands of your experiments as well.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say too that part of the motivation for the template, the optional template that we introduced this year, was we saw just a huge variety of structures and writing styles and reproductions submitted previously. And this is one way to make sure that you're getting all of the information into your report that really will benefit the reviewers and future readers. So the template's optional. And if, for, I would say the more senior students, those that have some research experience, probably can adjust that or just, write the report as they normally would. But as a sort of guide, it is a useful tool for people that are learning how to write machine learning papers, just to make sure that they include all of the information that's necessary. So it's meant to make it easier, and I hope that we do see some adoption so that people can have some consistency. And again, I think a point that Jessica made, which is we want to make it easy for a reader. We want to facilitate understanding of what you have done. And so good, clear communication in different sections where you've got an accurate description of the process that you went through to get your results, I think that's really what will benefit future readers.
That's great. We have just a few minutes left, and I'm tempted to do something. I haven't warned any of my co-panelists about this, but I'm going to do a really rapid fire round of questions. Last words from each of you before we close. Really quickly, Guillaume, how many hours would you estimate you put into your reproducibility work?
Oof. I don't know. It must be a bit under 100 hours, but I'd say a good, 40, 50 hours. And, that doesn't include all the computing time that we do on the side with our environments.
Thank you. Gabrielle, over to you. Do you feel like the reproducibility challenge helped you land your job?
I was already an intern at Microsoft beforehand, but, for sure, because I'm moving to more of an AI-oriented organization within Microsoft, it may help me to negotiate to get into a better position within that organization, just having had some level of experience doing research over the average software engineer. So that it could potentially help me in the future, but it didn't help me particularly
with this one.
Yeah.
Thank you. Carl, question for you. Are you going to participate again in the reproducibility challenge?
I don't know yet. Not this year, that's for sure. But it was a nice experience, so why not?
Excellent. Jesse, question for you. You said about 40% of papers came with code this year at EMNLP. What's your prediction for next year?
I would hope, fingers crossed, 60%. We also we introduced this reproducibility checklist, which will be used at NACL, which is another conference upcoming. Their deadline is in the next few weeks. So hopefully what we will see at NACL is an improvement in code submission over EMNLP.
That's great. Thank you. Hugo, quick question for you. What is your estimate of the number of papers at NeurIPS, percentage of papers that have really high reliability in terms of reproducibility? You're overseeing the acceptance of all of them.
Oh my goodness. I think I might be somewhat pessimistic. I think there's still values in those papers, but a weakness of the process, which is to just provide, link to code, is that, there's no verification beyond that, which is why this challenge is important. If it was less than half, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised, which doesn't mean that these papers aren't valuable. I think there are good conceptual ideas behind, but if we did more than half, I think I would be pretty happy with that.
I'll take it from the point of view that you think as scientists, we have to be humble and always aim for more and better work.
It's hard to get it right. I think it's not easy. So yeah.
Absolutely. Jessica, quick question for you. I know you keep an eye on many different sub-communities. Do you have a sense of who has the better track record between core machine learning, language, vision in terms of reproducibility?
I don't necessarily know who's doing the best job. I would like to believe that, because the NeurIPS community has had the longest track record, we have been most acculturated to these norms, but you never know. I would hope though that since NeurIPS is such a big community, that it will have enough of an influential role that everyone's doing a good job. So it's, again, like Hugo said, it's hard to tell.
Thank you very much. Koustuv, last word for you. What do you think everyone should keep in mind when they're participating in this challenge? What's the guiding message to keep in mind?
Think about this way, that you are contributing to the knowledge of the original paper. So think about this way, that you are like an extra author in that paper, and how you can help to all the readers to help them to get more information out of that paper. So your investigation is useful. Your investigation doesn't need to be adversarial. Your investigation will actually help the strength of the paper, and will actually help readers to make more informed decisions about the paper. So think yourself in that way, and best of luck for the challenge.
Thank you so much for that. I don't think I could have said it better. I really have this point of view that we are engaged in science as really an activity that we do as a community. And that's why I'm really invested in this work. With this, let me thank all of our panelists who joined us today. It's been wonderful to have this chance to chat with you. Thank you to everyone who sent in their questions, who joined us on Zoom or for the streaming. And thank you for all the participants, all who are out there and who are going to help us with this work through their actual reproducibility reports. Some of the questions we didn't get to, we'll try to get back to you in chat or in comments. And feel free to ping the organizers if you have some really important information you need to know about to enable you to participate. Thank you all very, very much. And I hope you have a good day wherever you are.
Thanks,
Bye,
Joelle.
everyone.
Thanks, Joelle. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Joelle. Thanks,
Thank you.
Koustuv.
Thank
Thanks, everyone.
you. Thanks all for coming.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.